everyone. Thanks for having me here today. It's really lovely that there's so many of you. Slightly disconcerting that I can't hear myself through a microphone, but bear with me. So my name's Sarah Briggs. I'm the Grants Manager here at the Museums Association. And one of the funds I work on primarily is the Esmée Fairbairn Communities and Collections Fund. This offers core grants to single museum organisations for strategic development of their inclusive collections work, but also partnership project grants for museums and community organisations working equitably with collections to achieve shared aims for inclusion. And this partnership funding is a brand new element for us. It's not something we've done before. It's something that's evolved from some of the incredible work that we funded through our previous guys, the Esmée Fairbairn Collections Fund. And we're particularly looking in this for equitable partnerships here. And that's why I'm here to talk to you about this today. The need for partnership funding came out really through a review of the Collections Fund that we undertook in 2024. We review the fund every couple of years, and 2024 was one of those years. I will tell you a little bit more about that review shortly. But before this, I did want to talk you through a couple of examples of projects that we funded and as the Collections Fund, so in our previous guise, that were really great examples of how museums are transforming participatory practice into equitable practice. And they definitely contributed to our decision making around the direction of travel for our funding. So firstly, in 2024, we funded National Museums Liverpool to work with an organisation called Luma Creations. They're a charity dedicated to celebrating and promoting Latin American arts, culture and people in the northwest of England. And they wanted to work together with the Latin American communities in the northwest to shape the reinterpretation of Latin American collections at National Museums Liverpool, starting with the redisplay of their Mixteca Codex, which is a rare and really, really beautiful Mesoamerican folded book. It's so fragile that the museum can only display it once a decade, and we're coming up to that time again. But this time the museum wanted to ensure that the display was done really in partnership with the Latin American community in the Northwest. And this project really stood out to us because of the equitable nature of the partnership that had already formed. So even from the initial pre-application conversation with us, and we always encourage you to have a conversation with us before you apply for funding, both organisations were involved in that conversation. And they were seeking to fund an equitable partnership to really look at that codex. And it was really clear that that partnership had developed the idea together, so the community organisation was just as much a part of the idea to apply to us and to apply for that funding as the museum, which of course was quite unusual. The project's now up and running. They've held some brilliant events already, and there's lots more coming up, so look out for their new displays later in the year. The other example I wanted to share was from Leeds Museums and Galleries, who also came to us in 2024 under the Collections Fund, guys. And it was the very final round of the Esmée Fairbairn Collections Fund that they came to speak to us about. They too came to their initial grant conversation with their community partners, an organisation called Space 2. They are an arts and social change organisation. They're based in Gipton in East Leeds, which is an area with quite high levels of deprivation. And this partnership had worked together already and had already devised a project called the Dead Plants Society, which was working with herbarium collections and with to look at those with social and historical stories of East Leeds, and to use a range of creative approaches to help those links come alive for the wider community and tie all that in with climate and climate change as well. So again, as I said, both organisations were present in that pre-application conversation, and they told us that whilst they'd worked together in the past, they were really keen now to progress the relationship so that the museum was no longer the lead organisation in that partnership. They wanted to work together in a much more equitable way, so that both organisations gained as much from the work as one another, and in a way that acknowledged Space 2 as the experts on the communities that they wanted to engage with the work. So the funding that we provided to them will pay for staff both at the museum but also at Space 2. And that will ensure that the work's well resourced. I'm really looking forward to seeing what that work brings because I really love a herbarium. But just to go back a little bit, I'll just give you a bit of background on the changes that we made to the Collections Fund. As I've already said, it was the result of a review of the fund in 2024, and I think it's one of the biggest changes we've made to the fund so far. All of our grantees since 2023 have formed supported action learning sets. Those were formed to help support organisational change through the funded work, but it's also been really, really valuable to us for evaluating the success of the fund. It's been a whole cohort of people who've been really willing to share their thoughts and see how their work is progressing their organisation. So they've supported this review along with our existing network of existing and recent grantees, and lots of their discussions and feedback were fed into the review of the fund overall. Additionally, we also commissioned the consultants who are running our action learning sets to undertake some further evaluation. So they did things like sent questionnaires out to grantees and people who'd applied to the fund. They also talked directly to community organisations who have worked with some of our funded projects. And out of that, we then commissioned 7 researchers from both museums and community organisations who regularly work with museums to talk to their networks and to provide provocations on the opportunities and barriers for UK museums to support the development of creative, confident communities and to help museums change lives through inclusive and participatory collections work. This group of people, as well as providing incredible provocations, they all came together in a roundtable discussion which was incredibly insightful, and this actually resulted in some direct recommendations for the future of the fund. Added to all of this, we did our own internal evaluation, as you might expect, of our applications and of funded projects, such as the 2 that I've talked to you today, so we could see the direction of travel that participatory practice was already taking in the sector. So it told us that the participatory practice was very much evolving, and it showed us that with the increasing prominence of partnership working between museums and community organisations, guidance was probably needed to ensure that this work achieved its maximum potential and could be achieved by even more museums. I would say you don't need to have undertaken participatory practice to go straight into equitable relationships with your communities. Equitable relationships are the natural evolution of participatory practice, and there are already loads of resources out there to support this way of working. So what we did was to produce a toolkit that brings together lessons from work that we funded, wisdom from community organisations who have worked with museums, and resources that are available in the wider community sector. And today what I'll do is I'll talk you through this resource. We produced it, important to say, we produced it to help both museums and community organisations. It's not just for museums, so do point your community partners to the resource too. Anybody really who's thinking of working in that partnership way. So these might be people who are already partners, and this guidance might help you to evolve your working practices into more formal and equitable partnerships that can benefit participants, visitors, or the people accessing the organisations, but also the organisations themselves. So we're really interested in helping organisations develop. In producing this toolkit, I spoke to lots and lots of people from community groups and charities who have worked in partnerships with museums. They were very candid about their experiences, and they shared very generously their advice to ensure that museums avoid a top-down approach while undertaking some incredibly life-changing work. They shared not just the methods that they've used in their work, but also why they want to work with museums and what they can bring to the table in those partnerships. All really helpful insights. This slide, I just want to show this because it shows some of the organisations to whom I am really grateful to and who I couldn't have produced the toolkit without. So we have Francisco Carrasco from Luma Creations, who I've mentioned that organisation already. He speaks incredibly beautifully about the partnership with National Museums Liverpool. Also, Alison Patterson from the Blackhall Community Centre. She speaks with loads of passion and excitement about the work that they are undertaking with Durham University Museums. We've also got Purple Stars, RICS inclusive researchers, who did not hold back at all when sharing their personal and lived experience of working with museums as a group of individuals with learning disabilities. And they've worked with a lot of museums, so they had a lot to say. And also Descendants, who are a London-based children's charity who've worked, amongst other organisations, with Paxton House, which is a house in Scotland. They've worked on various projects exploring the legacy of slavery in the house. And it's really, really important that we acknowledge the part that these people played in producing this guidance, as they are very much the experts when it comes to community perspectives of museums. The resource itself breaks down various stages of the process of ensuring equity in relationships, from establishing partnerships in the first place to undertaking the work and maintaining longer-term relationships. And along the way, there are lots of links to resources as well as case studies to help you in more practical ways. Other sectors have been working in an equitable way for quite some time. I would say that museums are probably just a little bit newer to this game. So nobody needed to reinvent the wheel. There's loads of stuff out there that can help this process, and this toolkit will help you find where those resources are. And what I'll do now is I'll go through each of these 3 stages and talk to you about some really important elements of this work. So, in the first stages of establishing equitable partnerships, deciding who you're going to work with is an obvious step 1. You probably will have a history of working together already, and that's going to be a factor, especially if both parties are sort of ready to formalise this relationship and are happy to have really open conversations about what worked and what didn't and how this can shape future ways of working. If you haven't got a history of working together, that's fine. Just look for organisations with common goals and who can provide the expertise that you need. The toolkit suggests not just what museums might seek from community partners, but also what they should look for from you. So they'll be asking questions around your motivation for the work and wanting assurances that it's genuine. Unfortunately, I was told by more than one of the community organisations that I spoke with that their role in previous museum projects ended up feeling a little tokenistic, or maybe a bit more motivated by box ticking than from a genuine desire to address equity, diversity and inclusion. So whether that's the case at your organisation or not, be prepared to address this. Show that you're open to listening to their ideas and addressing any reservations that they might have. It's not a place for being defensive at this stage, for sure. And create a space that allows this type of honest conversation to take place too. Don't see your museum as the expert body in this partnership, but instead acknowledge your partner's expertise. And expertise came up a lot in my interviews. Museums are usually seeking to work with community partners because they have something we don't, and that's often a relationship with people that we want to reach. So this needs to be acknowledged and it needs to be respected. It cannot be seen to be a top-down relationship. You as a museum are going to learn as much, if not more, from your community partner as they will from you. And this is where power dynamics comes into play and is worth mentioning. So it's really important to be able to have honest and open conversations at the outset to acknowledge any power imbalances. Often this might be around the perception of the museum from the people that you want to reach, which may lean towards the negative. Otherwise, you wouldn't need a community partner to help you with this. Museums might be seen as trusted sources of information by a lot of people, but certainly not to everybody. And to a lot of people, museums can seem like quite intimidating buildings. There's obviously a long history of sort of cultural exploitation from the sector. And they can also be seen as places where people might worry that they might be judged. So people who feel this way are probably not visiting your organisation to enable you to address this. A community organisation, therefore, has a role to help you reach and build trust with people who you are not reaching. But they're only going to do that if they feel comfortable enough to tell you what the barriers are in the first place, and if you're open enough to listen. You probably won't be able to remove all of these. We know a lot are systematic and societal, and you're not going to be able to quickly fix that within a funded project, for example. But acknowledging they exist means that you can minimise problems further down the line. And at this stage, you need to establish why you are both doing this work. So there should be some shared goals so that both parties are clear about what the partnership is trying to achieve. Both organisations might have their own separate goals too. For example, you might want to learn more about your collection from a different perspective. They might want to offer a cultural experience to their users, but the shared goals are what will unite you. There are lots of different tools to record this and ways that you can do it, but at a minimum, you should produce a partnership agreement or a statement of interest. Whatever title you give it, doesn't really matter. It's the content that's important, and it should detail the formal division of things like roles and responsibilities, should detail the ways you'll communicate, and also, really importantly, it should detail what to do if either party wants to cancel or terminate that relationship. And remember, this should be done together as a collaborative exercise. It will be the first of many collaborations you'll undertake with your community partner, so it's a great opportunity to set the work up as you mean to continue, and that's equitably. So Luma Creations and National Museums Liverpool had already undergone this process before they even came to talk to me about funding for their Bodies of Time project. It was done collaboratively, and it made working practices transparent from the outset. And importantly, from Luma, it enabled their communities to feel that they had a voice in the project right from the start. The next section in the toolkit explores some of the things you should do throughout the period of work you're undertaken, whether that's project-based or long-term. Communication is the cornerstone of effective, equitable partnerships. At the outset, you'll probably have decided how you'll meet and how often. You should have detailed that in your agreement. But it's really important to make sure you review it regularly and ask if it's working for everyone. Build in flexibility too. Yes, there's going to be some key milestones that you'll need to reach, but within those key milestones, and if I've learned anything from the many collections fund projects that I've supported, it's that things change constantly. And so you need to be able to change the method and plans. And this is where your shared objectives are going to be really helpful. Keep those constant, and then the ways you can achieve them can change if you need them to. It's very rare that a project will progress as was originally planned. So expect this and build in moments of reflection to explore what you might want to change and how you might make those changes together. And that brings me on to decision making. Equitable relationships will require equitable decision making. This can sometimes present some practical barriers, I am very aware. So, for example, things like budgeting can be particularly tricky, so I think it's worth just exploring this a little bit more now. Lots of museums will have experience of co-production and participatory practice, but equitable partnerships are going to challenge your ways of working even further. In a funded project, for example, it's likely that one organisation will have to be the recipient of that funding, of that budget, and they would pass what's needed on to another organisation. But that doesn't mean that they've made the decisions. You need to make sure you've got a process in place so that both parties make these decisions around how that budget is going to be spent. For example, if you need to recruit to make the work happen, you need to think carefully about who should be the organisation to recruit that person, and that shouldn't necessarily fall on the museum just because they're the recipient of the budget. So like with Dead Plants Project, it might be the best place in the community organisation to support that person's employment. And there could be more benefit to working that way around things such as building trust with your participants if the community partner is the one who recruits to that post. We particularly encourage this approach in our Esmée Fairbairn Communities and Collections Fund. We're very open to that level of working. It might require a little more admin, I do appreciate that, but it's definitely worth it to achieve those shared goals. So at a practical level, it's probably worth showing this toolkit to your finance teams and checking out what limitations there might be in terms of processes so that you can account for these before you start the work. Things such as salaries and contrasting organisational pay scales can be tricky to navigate, but if you've done your first stages right, you'll have the right relationship and the right forum and the right system of communication to allow for some really honest conversations. So I spoke to Paisley Museum in producing this toolkit, and they're working with multiple community partners for their Paisley Reimagined project. They had these very conversations with some of these community organisations, but because they'd formed those close, honest relationships, they were able to be really frank and open with one another about the various stances on salaries and the calculations that had led them to reach the decisions that they'd made. And ultimately, it enabled a compromise to be reached that pleased both partners. Conversations about money are never easy, but you cannot have an equitable relationship with a community organisation without them. And it stretches into other budgetary decisions too. So around things such as paying participants is something that you might want to talk about. Budgetary decisions should be shared. And I just want to provide you with an example of some of the unexpected and really delightful outcomes that can come from establishing shared decision-making processes in your work with community partners. And this comes from the Horniman Museum, whose Cha-Chai Tea Esmée Fairbairn Collections Fund project also helped us to shape some of the changes that we've made to form the Communities and Collections Fund. The Horniman in the first instance were keen to increase their audiences from London's South Asian and Eastern South Asian communities. To do this, they reached out to a number of community organisations and approached us for funding to work with them to explore the global history of tea and the museum's colonial legacy through its collections associated with tea. The entire project was community-led, with shared decision-making and shared budgetary responsibility. And the community organisations completely led on the creation of the final exhibition, which wasn't an approach the Horniman had ever taken before. They tell me it did challenge their expectations of what they thought an exhibition should be quite a lot. So, for example, participants insisted on including a full unedited 14-minute version of a film in the exhibition. The museum would never, ever have done that ordinarily, but that's what handing over power really means. And what they actually found is that visitors mostly stayed to watch the entire film in full. And community partners also, as part of this work, felt that it was really important that the museum addressed colonialism and its impacts. And so they did. And it's vital advocacy for this sort of work too. It's really hard to argue with this approach when the community itself are asking for it. The Horniman is subsequently taking this whole model of working forward, and they're going to apply that to all of their work with different local communities. Now, we know that, is that the right slide? Not quite. Just going to go to that. There we go. So we know that lots of the equitable partnerships we've been talking about so far have been formed as part of short-term work. I know that that's how you get a lot of this stuff done. It could be part of a project, or it could be just short-term funding to work towards a set goal or outputs. However, you probably won't have developed these partnerships with a plan to just ditch them all a couple of years down the line. So therefore, it's really, really important to think of these equitable partnerships as longer-term, continuing relationships, even if they might experience lulls in activity from time to time. And as Francisco of Luma said to me, it's not about the money, it's about the relationship, and that's how you should be thinking of it. One of the key ways of doing this is to build evaluation of the partnerships into the work from the outset. Both parties need to be able to input into this, and they need to be able to share both positive and negative experiences so that you can work together to make the relationship more equitable and more effective. We're used to asking participants to input into our evaluation, so just get used to asking your partners too. And I'm not here today to tell you how to evaluate for the social impact of your work, because we have a toolkit for that too, which you'll find on the Museums Association website. But back to our equitable relationships. Another vital thing to do at the end of a piece of work is to keep those conversations going. I know that a lot of this work takes place as part of short-term external funding or project work, but there are ways of continuing your equitable partnerships even when there isn't budget to do things and produce outputs. So you could let your partners use your space for their own things, for example, or invite each other to your own events and find ways in which you can input into your own, into your organisation's decision-making processes, even when you might not be formally working together. Board positions, for example, are a really great way of doing this, but just remember to make this relationship work both ways, and it should work both ways if you're going to maintain an equitable balance of power. I'd obviously also recommend that more than one person is the relationship holder here. As a sector, I think we've sometimes been guilty of passing all responsibility for maintaining community relationships to one member of staff, who is often a project officer whose role is temporary. So when the staff member goes, so too can that relationship. The most successful equitable partnerships are embedded with multiple staff being part of the conversation, and that's from both organisations too. This means that once a short-term piece of work is over, you'll still have the means and channels to talk to each other and plan the next thing. And this is exactly how Durham University Museum's work with Blackhall Community Centre has gone. They've seen 2 iterations of the project so far, from Street Museum to Street Cosmos, both externally funded, and temporary projects, and I know that they are looking for new ways to work together to expand this approach. Each stage evolves. And with each iteration, the relationship gets stronger and the balance of power even fairer. And that increases the impact that the work has on the participants. So think about your partnership as constantly evolving and building the tools to make this happen. Engaging senior stakeholders is going to be really critical to this too, and it's partly why you'll be gathering all of that incredible evaluation. You need your governing body and your leadership to know what you've done and how effective it has been. And if they can see the benefits of this work, they're much more likely to dedicate time and money to show them how your work has fed into wider organisational goals and priorities, or how it could in the future. It's going to increase the chances of maintaining the relationship longer term. The MA's Power to the People framework is a useful tool to do this. I know lots of you are already using it to track the impact of your work in terms of improving participatory practice, so just continue to use that as a tool to measure your equitable relationships. So that's a really quick overview of the resource. It's on the Museums Association website, and you'll find it under the Esmée Fairbairn Communities and Collections Fund page with the resources there. It's a bit of a one-stop shop to help you make your relationships more equitable, and I definitely urge you to visit these resources before you undertake your next piece of work of this nature. It's far easier to get a relationship up and running in an equitable way than to undo previous power imbalances in an existing partnership, although of course you need to do that too. Has anybody got any questions for me?
Before we do that, can you hear me? Yeah, I am live. Come on, let's have a big hand for Sarah Briggs here. Okay, any questions or observations from the floor? Can we have a show of hands? All the way over there. Put the mic up really close.
Hi, thank you so much. I know you touched a bit on finances and having conversations around money being tricky to navigate. I wondered if you had any advice about navigating conversations that have come up that are more about kind of structural bureaucracy and more traditional parts of kind of pushing things through a museum process when it comes to managing those relationships.
It's tricky, and you definitely need to talk. I was going to say a top-down approach, but actually, you need to tell all those at the top what the situation is, and that's why I say showing this toolkit to people, explaining the nature of equitable relationships and how important it is going to be really vital in that work. And there's lots of examples out there. You can certainly come to me directly if you need some particular advice on that. I'm very happy to sort of advocate on your behalf if you need to. But yeah, I am aware it's a difficult system. I know a lot of local authorities, for example, just aren't set up in that way. It's slowly changing, but it's going to take a lot of push work. And I think it's really important just to be really brutally honest with your community participants about it. It won't be the first time they've experienced complex bureaucracy getting in the way of things, so they'll understand what your intentions are and that you'll just try and find ways to work around it. Yeah.
Any other questions? I'm scanning. Anyone at all? Any observations anyone wants to make? It's pretty late in the whole day, 7th session. Okay, I will bring it to a close.